political crisis in Pakistan is our lead story today. We'll debrief Prashant on the context and examine why Imran Khan has become the rallying point for anti-establishment voices angered by the military and the lack of answers provided by the current administration. We then asked Jyotsna what's on the agenda at the first World Health Assembly after the WHO declared an end to the pandemic caused by the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And on the anniversary or after the anniversary of the defeat of the Nazi war machine in Europe, we talked to Prabir and ask him whether the rhetoric of freedom needs to be viewed more minutely through the prism of historical fact and narratives. You're watching People's Dispatch. This is the Daily Debrief. And first up, we're focusing on widespread violent protests that have erupted in Pakistan after the arrest of former Prime Minister Imran Khan on Tuesday. The widespread arrests, have been reported across the country, and the army has been deployed to at least ostensibly restore some sort of peace. Prashant, it's a developing story. Obviously, we don't really know what will happen next. But immediately after this arrest, widespread protests across Pakistan, what are the immediate reports that you've been receiving and how are things? I mean, now that detention has been ordered, what happens?
Right, Siddhant. So like we often end up saying on this show, by the time viewers watch this, things might be very different. So disclaimer on that. But what we know so far is, of course, the fact that there has been a huge wave of protests happening across the country, many of them quite violent in the sense that buildings have been attacked. The army has been called into 2 provinces. On the other hand, judicial developments also taking place. Imran Khan was arrested on Tuesday in what is called the Al-Khadr Trust case. He has been remanded to 8 days in the custody of the National Accountability Bureau, which is Pakistan's anti-corruption organization. Simultaneously, there's also another case called the Tosha Khana case, which has to do with the sale of gifts received by the government, by Imran Khan in his capacity as
Prime Minister.
And the sale of gifts to do with that. So he's been indicted in that as well. So there's also a proceeding going on in that. But what seems to have happened is that I think, the nature of the way in which he was arrested in the court premises really sparked off a huge amount of public anger both against the current government, of course, but also anger against the military establishment, which is, really the power behind the scenes in Pakistan. So in fact, there have been attacks on military installations as well, which is quite significant considering the military's sway over Pakistan and its, control over the levers of power. So there's been a lot of that, of course. I think there have been reports of deaths as well, very unclear as of now, the toll. There have been reports of 4 people dying in Peshawar alone, which has seen a lot of protests, but those are still unconfirmed. Over 1,000 people arrested in Punjab province alone. There have been attacks on radio stations, for instance. So overall, we can see that I think there is just complete chaos. Many observers pointing out that there was this latent anger which was kind of really waiting for a moment to sort of break out. And this has turned out to be that moment. And, the government really the civilian government, which is, of course, the military establishment is behind that government, but is really kind of has been forced into a corner, and I think not really knowing how to sort of respond to what is, to what has really escalated into a larger crisis and a moment of actually intense protests and violent protests as well.
Prashant, all this is happening in the context of the court having ordered elections in 2 provinces, including Punjab province. Also, there's the economic crisis that's going on. You did point out the government doesn't seem to have too many answers, but broadly speaking, politically, how do you see things proceeding over the next couple of months?
So just to give some kind of context, Imran Khan was Prime Minister till April 2022. And when he was overthrown, he claims that it was a US and military conspiracy because he was going closer to Russia. But whatever. So the fact remains that he was overthrown at a time when Pakistan's economic condition was steadily deteriorating. There were discussions with the IMF. They had 4 certain conditionalities. Imran Khan had a moment of popularity when he sort of went back from some of those conditions, and so there was that populist moment. He was forced to leave after no confidence motion. But most importantly, I think the key thing to note is that in the months since, he has kind of become a kind of magnet for people who are very frustrated with the system and who see, although he was in power for all these years and was also responsible for the economic situation, he nonetheless has managed to paint himself as an outsider. Someone who's been victimized by the establishment, someone who sort of captures the popular resentment with the establishment, etc. And it does not help that the current government comprises two of Pakistan's existing old political parties, the establishment parties, and it was backed by the military, is backed by the military. So this is the establishment personified, the current administration, and they have gone all out after Imran Khan in a bit to sort of understanding that he is popular, they've sought to kind of somehow get him into jail and thus neutralize him as a political force. Imran's counter strategy has been to try to call elections as quickly as possible, because he believes that if elections are called, there will be a wave in his support, and it is possible that might happen, which means that he can come back to power. So which is why elections have really been a bone of contention. The government wants to delay it as long as possible. Imran Khan wants to advance it as quickly as possible. So this to and fro, this kind of tug of war between these two forces is what has been defining the Pakistani political landscape for quite some time. So it did look like there were some negotiations taking place and there was possibility of some kind of an agreement, but it does seem that in between, Imran Khan tweeted kind of making allegations against a military officer, senior general, and that may have set off this current chain of events as well. So important thing to note. But I think so that's a political context. In the economic context, like we have talked about often, there's a horrible situation in terms of inflation, in terms of power prices. Everywhere the government's response has just been to follow IMF rules, obediently without any even question. So all in all, a complete crisis of governance in Pakistan, and it's not surprising that so many people are turning to Imran. So although let's be very clear about it, Imran Khan came to power as a protege of the military. He was part of the establishment. Relations between them took a hit over time, but it's not that he was that much of an outsider either. But he has, I think, successfully managed to rebrand himself. In between, there was an assassination attempt against him that also gave him a bit of, helped him gain some amount of sympathy as well. So he sort of emerges as this sole, he's kind of portrayed himself as this person who's being attacked from all corners and who's speaking for the people. And those waves are really working in his favor, it seems like. And the fact that the government is trying so hard to nab him in some way or the other. The credibility is also an issue, because it's not that those in government today have a crystal clear record, so people are aware of that. So I think what Imran Khan is pushing for is right now to create that amount of say waves enough, so to speak, so that the government is either the army comes in and takes over, which makes them even more unpopular, or that the government is forced to give in and call early elections as quickly as possible. And I think both scenes, as far as I think Imran might see it as positive for him, because both of them undermine his opponents and in fact increase his credibility.
Put him in a stronger position.
Exactly.
Right. We will of course leave it for another time to discuss whether he has any way out for the people of Pakistan from the situation there. And thanks very much for that update, Prashant. We're moving on to our next story. The World Health Assembly is beginning in just a few days in Geneva. Jyotsna will be there with the People's Health Movement. She's here today in studio to outline the key issues that are on the agenda after, of course, the WHO has declared an end to the global health emergency caused by the coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus, that is. Jyotsna, the World Health Assembly, as I was mentioning in that brief introduction, a major event you will be, of course, also attending. What is this year, now that the global health emergency has been declared off, what are the key elements on the agenda, and how do we look at sort of, is it like planning ahead for the next few years, or is it very specific, targeted, looking at just for next 12 months? How does it work?
Yeah, so this is the annual meeting organized by the WHO. Now, COVID is no more an emergency according to WHO. But for the past 1 year or so, already there have been talks about how to prepare for the future pandemic. So, of course, this is going to be one of the major agendas to be discussed. This is the second World Health Assembly where we will be discussing about the preparation for the future pandemic. So, which is listed under health emergencies and pandemic preparedness and response.
Response.
And this process is much more detailed than the process for most of the other agenda items.
Right.
For example, the WHO has already conducted intermediary meetings with governments and civil society. Everybody could join online twice in between. Now we had in March and we had in April as well. So that preparation, so from executive board meeting which happened in January to now in WHA, we will see how the discussions have moved and we will be able to witness that. And frankly, we are hoping that we are able to come up with a plan which is much better than what we had for the COVID. For COVID, because the kind of inequities that we saw, although unfortunately we are seeing that it is the same pressures that these negotiations are also facing, and the language is not as developed and robust in terms of ensuring that people don't suffer anymore. We are not seeing that language still, but there is of course a lot of push towards that, and let's see how it goes. So this is going to be a major agenda. Apart from that, we will also talk about universal health coverage. It has come to be called something that everybody says is the answer to all maladies, which we keep saying is not, because the C should not stand for care, it should stand for should not stand for coverage, should stand for care. So those discussions will also happen, and we are already seeing there are debates happening about certain agenda points within that. Eswatini brought about a resolution which they had said they will bring this resolution in WHA. It was discussed in EB also, and something has happened in between, which one can imagine what it would be, that the language has changed a lot. So the resolution is about surgical care and anesthesia. So many of us probably don't realize, but this is 60% of the world population does not have access to surgery and anesthesia when they need it. As in, I think we keep hearing how sometimes certain procedures for women, especially regarding reproduction, they are being performed without actually giving them anesthesia, which is extremely painful. We keep hearing this, but the reason is that people don't have access to it. So this resolution was to say that everybody should have the right to surgery and anesthesia in time. But the language by now is so watered down. They are using operative care instead of surgical care, which makes a hell lot of a difference, because surgery is a much more comprehensive term. It also includes surgery for cancers and many other problems, but operative care is very limited in that sense of the term. So we are already seeing that these things are going to become very contentious as we reach Geneva and when the discussions start. So this is what we can expect here.
And so what are the sort of positives you're seeing from people's health perspective? Brazil is back in the fold this time and kind of leading a push along with other BRICS nations, and so this has an impact. It's part of the, I think, wider geopolitical realignment that we're witnessing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Health is as political as politics itself. So Brazil, we saw in executive board meeting in January that now that Lula has been elected and Bolsonaro is not there anymore, it is already taking pro-people positions. So that's what used to happen 5 years earlier, when Brazil would lead the negotiations and taking pro-people positions. And it has its own importance because it takes a position, it is a much bigger country, because when the smaller countries raise same points, it is not as impactful as a country like Brazil does. So that we are seeing, Brazil is already talking about indigenous people's rights, something we have not witnessed being talked about in quite some time. So one can feel excited about it. Also, with Brazil becoming strong again in this on this front, we can also expect BRICS, or we would like BRICS to also become a bloc which can take more pro-people positions, because then there's China, there's Russia, there's India. India takes position, better positions vis-a-vis patents. In their home ground, they are not very progressive at times, but when it comes to international front, they do a very good job. So if this bloc can emerge again, it will be really good. Also, when we talk about politics, there are agenda items also on politics. It is not apolitical in that sense,
Absolutely, yeah.
because there is also an important agenda where the WHO will inform about the health conditions in Palestine and Syrian Golan, the territories which are occupied by Israel for a long time now. So we usually see that the kind of pushback that comes from Israel and US to these reports also. But at the same time, it is so important to bring this information out, because frankly, nobody literally other than WHO can bring out that information. And we want WHO to do a better job, take positions, which they don't. So that is where you see some politics playing. There is also an agenda item on health of migrants and refugees. Again, that is related to the kind of politics that we see, which leads to problems of, like, people have to migrate and people go on to become refugees. So if you start to talk about their health and use it to say that we do not want these things to happen, it will be really good. So it is health and it is very political. We expect the same in those 10 days in Geneva.
Absolutely.
So,
and we expect to have more conversations with you on
Absolutely.
what goes down in Geneva. And you will be, of course, there and give us a first-hand sort of account of things as they go. And of course, be also participating in some manner, if not, of course, not voting, but participating in some discussions.
So civil society or what is called non-state
non-state,
actors, they also are given some time to speak. So so from People's Health Movement, we will be intervening on more than 10 agenda items, something it runs into 15 to 16 agenda items, where we do take our politics right there, and we say what produce a very sort of informed critique of the way things are happening at the WHO and Global Health Watch, Global Health level.
For us on this show as well, Jyotsna, you and others from People's Health Movement. Thanks very much for joining us today. May 9 every year is marked in Russia, as it was in the former Soviet Union, as Victory Day, the day the combined Allied forces ended the Second World War by forcing the Nazi war machine to capitulate. The former Soviet Union, of course, played a lead role in this most bloody and bitter of conflicts, losing between 20 and 30 million of its citizens. Prabir, Victory Day is being celebrated in Europe, first the European Union on May 8th and Russia on May 9th. Where we stand today, given the rise of the right that we have seen across Europe, of course also sort of countered by people's movements across the continent, how do you frame some of the rhetoric coming out of the West, Germany, for example, talking about not wanting to go back to a past where, freedom was the privilege of the few? And although increasingly that seems to be the kind of structure that they are pushing for more and more.
When you talk about the Freedom Day, it's good to go back to the significance of what that Freedom Day was. This was really defeat of fascism, defeat of Nazi Germany, earlier Italy. And it was the combined strength of, at that time, really Great Britain, as they would have called themselves, after the United Kingdom, and then the United States, and of course the Soviet Union. Now, the interesting part of that, of course, is that we have two Freedom Days that they don't even celebrate the same day. The point again is that the West, as of now, would like to give the credit of defeating Nazi Germany to United States rather than to Soviet Union. In fact, if you today, and these polls have been done post the Second World War, polls are done to see how people saw the Second World War and who were the ones who won the victory against, contributed to the victory against Nazi Germany. Then, and close to the war, everybody said, Soviet Union was the major force, because they lost the most in terms of soldiers, and the Red Army broke the back of the German war machine. 80% of their soldiers, their air force, was destroyed in the Eastern Front. So all of that taken together was fresh in the minds of the people. As it has gone, and these polls have been taken at every 10-year intervals or few years intervals.
Mm.
But now, thanks to the, what shall we say, the propaganda machine that is Hollywood and all the other films that have gone into being, have come into being, we now have a picture for most of the people, and the polls show that the victory was, the contribution to that victory was the United States as the main one.
Mm.
Well, as you know, the United States entered the war later, lost much less than others did. Yes, did fund and provide various infrastructure support, but in terms of soldiers, their contribution was much less. So all that is forgotten, while the Soviet Union, as you know, lost maybe anything between 20 to 30 million people, including soldiers.
Yeah.
And the bulk of the casualties as well as the war was really fought on the Eastern Front.
Yeah.
So that is one part of it. The second part of it is converting the freedom now to fight, and this has been something which the West has been doing for a considerable period of time, combining fascism with Soviet Union's politics and ideology, which is socialism, communism, making them totalitarianism. Even this word, which is coined, to see how they could identify Germany with Soviet Union, Nazi Germany with Soviet Union. So instead of working class or instead of socialism, redefine it in terms of only freedom. So you don't have the axis of wealth inequalities. You don't talk about that. You only talk about in the abstract freedom. And that freedom is, of course, whether you have money or you don't have money. The freedom of the trillionaire today, and that's what we're really talking about, is the same as the freedom of a person who doesn't have enough to eat. So the fact that these are two very different poles, the wealth and the money, that is all forgotten. And it is sought to be put under the carpet by talking about freedom only in this particular political sense and nothing else. And then saying dictatorship versus free countries, democracy. And then you talk about then autocracy, dictatorships, as opposed to electoral democracy, which is what they have. And you don't talk about the fact that these are the same powers which decide this is the rule-based order based on democracy, etc., etc., and the ones who have the neo-colonial powers, earlier the colonial powers, and the United States, of course, has still its Monroe Doctrine, which is Latin America really our sphere of influence. So I think those are the ironies of the Victory Day, that Victory Day today is made into something very different than what the Second World War is about. And I guess in that context, it is right that they have two Victory Days, because they are really celebrating different victories, not the same one.
Yeah. Praveen, should we be looking at it in this historical context that you have kind of put to us? Or should we be focused a little more on the current scenario with the war in Ukraine, particularly in focus, and that creating a further divide between these two different freedoms?
So, you know, this particular divide that we are talking about came about that United States decided that they had to extend their political and military power across the Atlantic. And that's why what is called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And it's really centered on ocean as a power and using that to control what the Soviet Union and the Socialist Bloc at that time, all of which has, of course, the Socialist Bloc, which is really disintegrated because even before 90, actually, Germany got united before that. But when Soviet Union fell, then the whole countries in Eastern Europe, which had been socialist, a number of them switched to allegiance to the United States, the most politically and economically powerful country at that point of time. They also thought that with Yeltsin, who had become virtually a stooge of the Americans, and I'm not saying something which is unusual or new. In fact, the Time magazine, in Yeltsin's second election, put it on the front page, that these are the people, the American advisors, political advisors, which led to Yeltsin's victory. So we got his victory, was the Time magazine front cover. So Yeltsin had really surrendered to the Americans completely. And Putin coming back to declare independence of Russia was not without pain, because Putin desperately wanted to be a part of Europe, except that he was denied.
Yeah.
So this clash that we are now talking about, which is the Ukraine war, is really between the larger forces at play, which is post 1990. The idea was that Russia also should be dismantled. It is too big, it is too resource rich, and we can control it only if it is broken up. So that had been one of the, shall we say, unstated policy objectives of the United States. But the Russian state was too strong to go down like that, and Putin could actually bring it back. And that was more also the post 2008, after the Georgia issue. Also the threat that Russia was playing. That's a big enough country, it makes a difference in the both the economic sphere, oil, gas, etc., but also in the political sphere, particularly in Europe. So the isolation and cornering of Russia continued, what we've discussed much earlier with the eastward expansion of NATO. And the idea is in the Ukraine war was that during this, Russia can be broken. And they thought that with the economic sanctions, they'll be able to break Russia. Unhappiness of the Russian people with the sanctions will lead to fall of Putin, and therefore a second Yeltsin-like revolution, perhaps in Russia again. Therefore, the dismemberment of Russia will follow. All that hasn't happened. So I think it is good to reflect what this war is about, though this is not today's subject that you've raised, that it is really an attempt to colonize Russia and break it up. And Ukraine was always going to be the battlefield and the weapon that the NATO would use against Russia, except that it doesn't seem to be working. And the world is not following in their footsteps. The world is decided. 80% of the world doesn't want to sanction Russia and join the United States. So I think that argument about freedom as it is being given has to be reworked. And it is certainly not working in the favor of the United States and its allies, particularly as G7 are colonial, ex-colonial powers and United States. They do not, to the rest of the world, they do not stand out as flag bearers of freedom.
Particular beacons of hope and freedom, All right, Pravir, I think we have once again gone well over our allocated time, but as always, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. That's all we have time for on this episode of the Daily Debrief. From Prabir, myself, and the entire team here at People's Dispatch, thank you very much for watching. As always, we encourage you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for details on these stories and all of the other work we do. Don't also forget to follow us on the social media platform of your choice. We'll be back again, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.